July 28, 1944, a narrow country lane near Saint-Lô, France. Staff Sergeant William McBride gripped the edge of his Sherman tank's commander hatch as it crawled cautiously through the Norman bocage. The 23-year-old from Oklahoma had never seen terrain like this before. What his instructors at Fort Knox had called simple farmland turned out to be a maze of earthen walls topped with centuries-old hedgerows, each one a natural fortress. Through his periscope, McBride watched another Sherman burning 200 yards ahead, thick black smoke pouring from its turret. The Germans called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that always worked on the first try. Just 3 days earlier, McBride had written a letter home, later found among his belongings in the National Archives, where he confessed, "We trained for open tank warfare, racing across plains like Patton promised us. Nobody told us France would be divided into thousands of tiny battlefields, where a single German with a Panzer could turn a 30-ton tank into a coffin. Nobody told us their Panthers could kill us from distances we couldn't even see them. But we're learning, and we're learning fast." The rules of survival in Normandy weren't written in training manuals, but in blood and burning steel. American tank crews faced a harsh reality their commanders hadn't predicted. The German Panthers' 75mm high-velocity gun could pierce a Sherman's armor from over a mile away. In contrast, the Sherman's own 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor even at point-blank range. The Tiger tank's 80mm cannon was deadlier still. Yet by the end of the war, American tankers developed tactics so effective that they achieved impressive kill ratios against these superior machines. That transformation began on June 6, 1944, D-Day, when the first Shermans rolled onto the beaches of Normandy. The 741st Tank Battalion, attached to the 1st Infantry Division, was among 5 independent tank battalions landing that day. Companies B and C fielded amphibious DD Shermans, tanks designed to swim ashore from landing craft. But that morning, with rough seas and 6-foot waves, commanders decided to launch 29 DD tanks about 6,000 yards from shore. It was a disaster. 27 sank within minutes, drowning their crews or forcing them to swim for their lives in the icy channel. Only 2 DD Shermans from the 741st made it to Omaha Beach under their own power. Company A, equipped with conventional Shermans modified with deep wading gear, did slightly better. 6 tanks and 3 tank dozers reached shore, though 2 tanks and a dozer were lost when their landing craft struck a mine. The surviving tanks of the 741st, alongside 38 tanks from the 743rd Battalion, which had wisely chosen not to launch their DDs in the rough seas, provided critical fire support for infantry trapped on the beach under intense German fire. Lieutenant Dean Rockwell of Company B later wrote in his after-action report, "We watched tanks brew up before we even reached the seawall. The Germans had pre-registered every approach. Every tank that fired drew instant counterfire from positions we couldn't even see through the smoke and dust. It was a brutal lesson for American tankers, the first of many. The enemy wouldn't always show himself. Sometimes you had to create the opportunity to strike." When the breakout from the beaches finally came, U.S. armor faced the next nightmare, the Norman bocage. This countryside was made up of thick earthen banks 4 feet high, tangled with hawthorn brambles and trees whose roots had woven through the soil for centuries. The fields they surrounded were small, rarely more than 200 feet across, and completely enclosed. For tank crews trained on the wide-open plains, it was claustrophobic and deadly. Sergeant James Flowers of the 2nd Armored Division described it best in a letter preserved by his family for 70 years. "We thought France would be rolling hills and pretty farms. Instead, we're trapped in a maze where you can't see more than 1 field ahead. The hedgerows funnel us into narrow lanes barely wide enough for a tank. The Germans wait in the next field with anti-tank guns zeroed in on these killing lanes. Every advance costs us tanks." German commanders quickly understood how to use the terrain to their advantage. Colonel Fritz Bollian of a Panzer division organized his defense around the bocage's natural strongpoints. His captured documents revealed a chillingly effective doctrine. Position anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts to cover every lane. Use camouflage to remain unseen, and let American tanks move into small, enclosed fields, then strike from multiple directions at once. The results were devastating. The 3rd Armored Division, which landed in Normandy on June 24th with 232 Shermans, lost 648 completely destroyed during the European campaign, with another 700 damaged and repaired. That's a staggering 580% total loss rate. The human cost was equally horrific. When a Sherman was hit, the armor-piercing round sent molten metal fragments bouncing around the crew compartment. If the ammo inside ignited, the tank could explode violently, sometimes blasting the turret clean off. Studies during the campaign showed that 82% of Shermans hit in combat caught fire, according to British research. American surveys put that number at 65%. Corporal Robert Sims of the 741st survived 3 tanks being knocked out beneath him. In a 1989 interview, he recalled, "You trained yourself not to think about fire. You told yourself the next shot would miss. Then you saw a tank 50 yards away get hit, and men burning inside. And you knew that could be you next." The ones who survived learned fast, and learned to never fight alone. The 5-tank platoon became the core of American armored warfare, tanks working together to guard each other's weak spots. Every Sherman carried a 5-man crew. The commander stood in the turret. The gunner sat to his left operating the main gun and coaxial machine gun, and the loader stood to his right. Down in the hull, the driver sat front left, while the bow gunner and assistant driver handled a .30 caliber machine gun on the right. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper of the 2nd Armored Division developed one of the first tactics that truly saved lives. His method, documented in July 1944 after-action reports, became standard practice within weeks. The rule was simple: never send a single tank into an unknown field. One tank moved forward to draw fire while 2 others observed from different angles. When the forward tank came under attack, the watching tanks spotted enemy positions by the flash of their guns, then fired back immediately with high explosive and white phosphorus shells. The lead tank had to reverse at once. Any hesitation meant death. This bounding overwatch tactic demanded immense discipline and courage. The crews knew the lead tank was bait, but it gave them a way to expose and destroy German anti-tank positions that would have otherwise stayed hidden. They called it fishing for Germans. The biggest breakthrough came when U.S. crews learned how to exploit their Sherman strengths against the Panthers' flaws. The Panthers' frontal armor and long-range gun made it deadly, but it was plagued by mechanical problems, slow turret rotation, and poorly trained crews by mid-1944. Captain James Burt of the 66th Armored Regiment described the solution in his combat diary. "The Panther can kill us before we can reach it. Its front armor is nearly invincible to our 75mm, but its turret traverse is painfully slow, 30 seconds to turn 180 degrees. Our Sherman can spin its turret in 10 seconds. That's our advantage. We don't fight head-on. We force them to turn, then move faster than they can track us. Get to their flank or rear. That's where you kill them." It sounded reckless, but it was calculated. The Sherman was faster and more agile on solid ground. While a Panther took minutes to reposition, a Sherman could dart through hedgerows and use the terrain to sneak around for a side shot. Sergeant Lafayette Poole of the 3rd Armored Division became the master of these tactics. Between June 27th and September 19th, 1944, Poole and his crew destroyed 12 enemy tanks, 258 armored vehicles and guns, killed over 1,000 German soldiers, and captured 250 prisoners, all in just 81 days and across 3 successive Shermans. His driver, Corporal Wilbert Richards, recalled in a 1982 interview, "Poole always said the Germans thought too much like tankers and not enough like hunters. They'd set up a perfect ambush and wait. Poole would spot them, then circle around. By the time they realized he was behind them, he'd already fired." Success depended on knowing the land as well as the locals did. Tank commanders studied maps obsessively, patrolled aggressively, and when possible dismounted to walk the ground themselves, noting every path, gap, and spot that could hide a tank. Some commanders took it further, using creativity their superiors sometimes called cowboy tricks. These unorthodox tactics, drawn from farm and ranch life back home, relied on deception, speed, and using the terrain to confuse the enemy, ideas that rigidly trained German tankers rarely anticipated. Lieutenant Raymond Dunnigan of the 4th Armored Division explained the mindset in a letter to his brother that August. "The Germans fight by the book. They set up their Panthers in good defensive positions and wait for us to come straight at them. But most of us grew up on farms. You don't charge a bull head-on. You spook it, make it move where you want it, then finish it." These cowboy tactics shared a common pattern. One Sherman would deliberately expose itself to draw attention, while others maneuvered unseen through hedgerows. As the Panthers' crew focused on the visible tank and turned its turret to fire, the hidden Shermans closed in from the sides or rear. Other crews exploited the Panthers' habit of backing up when threatened, positioning themselves so the enemy would reverse straight into their gun sights. All of this required constant communication and coordination, and cooperation with infantry was equally vital. Early in the Normandy campaign, tank infantry teamwork was clumsy and costly. When the 741st Tank Battalion joined the 2nd Infantry Division on June 15, 1944, both sides struggled to coordinate, so the battalion spent the rest of June training intensively at the platoon level, practicing with infantry squads right in the bocage. They developed new hand signals that could be seen through smoke and chaos. Within 2 weeks, the difference was clear. Both tank and infantry casualty rates dropped sharply. The most famous technical innovation of the Normandy campaign was the invention of the hedgerow cutter, nicknamed the rhino or prongs. The problem was simple but deadly. When a Sherman tried to climb over a hedgerow, its nose tilted high, exposing its thin belly armor to German fire, while its gun pointed uselessly at the sky. The Germans learned to set up anti-tank weapons to hit Shermans at this vulnerable moment. The solution came from Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, 2nd Armored Division. According to historian Max Hastings, Cullen was inspired by another soldier, Roberts, who suggested welding saw-like teeth to the front of tanks to cut through hedges. While others laughed, Cullen saw the genius in it and built a prototype. Using steel prongs cut from captured German beach obstacles, he welded them to the front of a Sherman, creating tusk-like blades that could dig into the base of a hedgerow. As the tank moved forward, the prongs sliced through the earth, letting the tank stay level and push straight through instead of climbing over. On July 14, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley personally watched a demonstration of Cullen's invention. Impressed, he immediately ordered the modification for as many tanks as possible before the launch of Operation Cobra. Within 2 weeks, more than 500 Shermans had been fitted with the new cutters. The British, working independently, came up with a similar version called prongs. The Rhino changed everything. American tanks could now punch through the bocage at will, instead of being trapped in narrow lanes. The combination of better tactics, improved tank infantry teamwork, and innovations like the Rhino set the stage for Operation Cobra, the massive breakout offensive that would transform the Normandy campaign. Cobra began on July 25, 1944. More than 2,500 heavy and medium bombers dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions west of St. Lo. The bombing was devastating but not precise. Some bombs fell short, tragically hitting American lines and killing Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, one of the highest-ranking U.S. officers to die in Europe. Despite these losses, the bombardment shattered German defenses. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions led the breakout, racing south to cut off retreating German forces in the Cotentin Peninsula. For tankers who had spent weeks grinding through hedgerows at a crawl, the change was dramatic. Suddenly, they were racing across open country where speed and maneuver mattered more than caution. Staff Sergeant William McBride described it best in his account from July 28th. We'd spent weeks creeping from hedgerow to hedgerow. Now we were flying across open fields at 25 miles an hour, turrets swinging constantly. We spotted a German column ahead, probably retreating. My gunner hit the lead truck before they even knew we were there. They scattered, and we chased them for 2 miles. This breakout unleashed a new kind of warfare that played to American strengths. The Sherman's mechanical reliability allowed it to fight day after day, while German Panthers and Tigers broke down frequently. U.S. logistics kept fuel, ammunition, and spare parts flowing while German supplies were hammered by Allied air attacks. Air superiority became decisive. German armor moving in daylight was relentlessly hunted by Allied fighter bombers, especially the P-47 Thunderbolt. Tank crews quickly learned to call in airstrikes when they encountered heavy opposition. Together, U.S. tanks would pin German units in place and air power would destroy them from above, a deadly combination. One of the clearest examples came during the Battle of Aricourt in September 1944. There, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division faced elements of the German 5th Panzer Army, including elite Panther-equipped brigades. On paper, the Germans had the advantage: more tanks, stronger armor, better guns. But the Americans held the edge in tactics, coordination, and initiative. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding Combat Command A, positioned his forces skillfully around the village of Ericourt, placing tanks hull down behind ridges and infantry nearby to guard against infiltration. The battle began on September 18th, when the German 111th Panzer Brigade attacked Lunéville and was crushed, losing 24 tanks. The next morning, thick fog blanketed the battlefield. The Panthers' long-range advantage vanished. Forced into close combat, German crews advanced blindly into American ambushes. U.S. tankers used the fog to mask their movements, flanking and striking from multiple directions while the Panthers struggled to rotate their slow turrets. The Germans kept repeating the same rigid tactics, advancing in predictable formations that exposed their sides. By September 29th, the Americans had destroyed more than 75 German tanks and armored vehicles, while losing fewer than 25 Shermans. A decisive victory that proved how far U.S. tank tactics had come since Normandy. The final and most brutal test came in December 1944, during the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Determined to split the Allied armies, Germany threw its last elite panzer divisions into the fight. The 741st Tank Battalion helped defend the towns of Rocherath and Krinkelt from December 16th to 19th, facing Tiger and Panther tanks in vicious close combat. In the snowy forests, the Sherman's mobility and teamwork neutralized the Germans' technical edge. American crews dug in with hull-down defenses, coordinated tightly with infantry, and used aggressive flanking maneuvers whenever possible. Lieutenant Colonel William Hogue of the 9th Armored Division later summed up the lesson. You don't win tank fights by sitting still and trading shots with Panthers. You win by moving, always moving, forcing them to turn their turrets while you work around their flanks. Those tactics worked. The Americans held the northern shoulder of the Bulge against repeated assaults. The 741st Tank Battalion earned a Distinguished Unit citation for its stand. In the end, the real strength of American armor wasn't in steel or firepower. It was in people. Each Sherman's 5-man crew became a tightly bonded team, their trust in each other forged in fire and survival. Every man's life depended on the others, and that bond, more than any gun or armor plate, was what carried them through to victory. These crews developed their own kind of battlefield wisdom, lessons passed down from veteran tankers to new replacements. Never let your tank sit on a ridgeline. Watch for dust kicked up by enemy gunfire. Use white phosphorus shells to blind Panther optics. If you spot one Panther, assume there are more you can't see, and always work with your wingman tanks to set up crossfire. The difference between American and German tank training was stark. By mid-1944, most U.S. crews had months of training at home, followed by more in England. They'd learned real combined arms tactics and gained valuable knowledge from veterans who had already fought in North Africa and Italy. German crews, on the other hand, faced collapsing training standards. Fuel shortages limited their practice time, and desperate demand for replacements meant rushed, incomplete instruction. New Panther brigades often went into combat with barely trained crews, and that inexperience showed, especially in battles like Ericourt, where German tactical blunders stemmed more from lack of skill than bad doctrine. The American focus on combined arms, tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support working together, became the great equalizer. A lone Sherman might not beat a Panther in a one-on-one fight at long range, but when backed by coordinated firepower, it became part of a machine that could crush German armor through teamwork and overwhelming support. For many tankers, this transformation was deeply personal. Men who once feared German tanks learned that courage, training, and tactics could outweigh superior machines. Technical Sergeant Robert Early of the 3rd Armored Division wrote home in March 1945, "When we first landed in France, every commander feared the Panthers. We thought they were invincible. Some crews froze the first time they saw one. Then we learned their weak points, how to force them to turn, how to flank them, how to get close enough to kill them. Now when we see a Panther, we see a target. They may have better tanks, but we're better tankers." The numbers backed him up. Post-war studies of tank-on-tank battles in Northwest Europe showed that once American crews mastered proper tactics, their kill ratios improved dramatically. Some divisions destroyed more than 3 Panthers for every Sherman lost. The war proved that technology alone didn't decide victory. Training, teamwork, and adaptability mattered more. German tanks were technically superior, But that didn't make up for fuel shortages, poor logistics, or inexperienced crews. American innovation and the so-called cowboy tricks reflected a uniquely American mindset: improvisation, initiative, and the freedom for junior leaders to solve problems on their own. Men like Sergeant Cullen, who invented the hedgerow cutter, embodied that spirit. Flanking maneuvers and fast, aggressive tactics came naturally to men who'd grown up working the land or driving trucks across rough country. Reliability also mattered. The Sherman wasn't the most powerful tank, but it was one of the most dependable. It ran day after day with simple maintenance, while German Panthers and Tigers broke down constantly. American logistics kept the Shermans fueled, repaired, and replaced, an industrial miracle that saw nearly 50,000 built compared to Germany's 6,000 Panthers. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole was badly wounded on September 19, 1944, when his third tank, In the Mood, was destroyed near the Siegfried Line. He lost a leg, but survived. His crew continued fighting, crediting his lessons with keeping them alive. Another veteran, Staff Sergeant William McBride, survived multiple tank losses and later said in an interview, "We weren't better tankers because we were Americans. We were better because we had to be. The Germans gave us no choice but to learn or die. We learned how to fight with what we had and make it work." The lessons those men learned reshaped post-war U.S. armor doctrine. Combined arms coordination, mobility, and mechanical reliability became the foundation of American tank warfare. Cowboy tricks, once just a nickname for bold flanking tactics, came to symbolize a professional, confident fighting force that relied on initiative and teamwork rather than brute strength. By late 1944, the numbers no longer favored the Germans. What had begun as a mismatch had turned into a chess match, one the Americans now dominated through superior coordination, timing, and maneuvering. The hedgerows of Normandy had become a brutal classroom, but from it emerged a generation of tankers who had mastered their craft. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, American armored divisions had fought their way from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, defeating the most advanced armored forces of the war. They didn't win because they had the best tanks. They won because they had the best soldiers, trained, adaptable, and determined to learn and survive. The story of those Sherman crews stands as a reminder that even in the hardest conditions, ingenuity and courage can turn weakness into strength and change the course of history.